This morning, we're going to ask the question, were you labeled as a child? What does labeling do? What happens when children specifically are given labels? My guest, who I will introduce in a moment, was given labels. The label of being a dumb kid, had difficulty in school, and how that label affected him. On the website, thekidcounselor.com, in her article entitled "The Problem with Labeling Children," Brenna writes, "We live in a society that labels everything. We have labels on our clothes, our cheeseburgers, our meat and produce, and the list goes on. We like the convenience of neatly packaged words so we can sum up the person, place, or thing and know what to expect. However, especially with children, even harmless labels can play a lasting role in self-esteem, behavior, and long-term personality. Children develop and define their sense of self by processing what others tell them about who they are, what they are good at, how they behave, and so on. The communication principle of the looking glass self from Charles Cooley can be applied. Cooley believes that by reflecting back to us who we are and how we come across, other people function as mirrors for us. Imagine the implication then for children. When we reflect on who they are, every time a teacher says he or she is a good student, or a coach says average player, that helps define the way the child views him or herself. And she goes on, this article, thekidcounselor.com, The Problem with Labeling Children, a link can be found on our website at the Cross Live, and you can go there and access that article. She goes on later in the article and says, labels have much more of an impact than we realize, and we need to be mindful of how we talk about our children. If you must define certain things about them to yourself or others, try to choose positive versions of the same trait. For example, spirited rather than hyper, or cautious instead of timid. Being mindful of descriptions we give off to children can make a difference in the self-esteem and self-concept they develop. The self-fulfilling prophecy can go both ways. A child told he is lazy will likely be so. But the opposite is also true, that a child told they are helpful will help. Keeping the focus on the child's positive traits while avoiding labels can encourage children to become healthy and happy. The Problem with Labeling Children, Brenna, in thekidcounselor.com. Again, that article, the link to it at least, is on our website at the Cross Live, and it is there on the screen. My guest, Dave Bowslaugh. Dave is a great friend of mine. I've only known Dave the last 3 years, but we have worked together and just grown in a sense of appreciation. Dave, as a boy growing up, had lots of labels, and he will talk about those. But you know what? There was a time of incredible compensation, and we're going to talk on that too, because this young boy who was labeled would go on as a young man to be involved in athletics, and specifically the Junior World Championships, and there for Canada win a bronze medal. We'll talk about that more and show that later in 1978. And then the World Masters bronze for the 35 to 40-year-olds in the heavyweight black belt. That's why I want Dave Bowslaugh as my friend, not my enemy. He hails from the area of St. Catharines, Ontario. Would you join me in welcoming to At the Cross Live, Dave Bowslaugh? Hey, Dave.
Thank you very much.
How you doing, friend?
I'm doing awesome, thank you. That
Good.
was quite the introductory.
Good to have you, man.
Well,
Thank you for being here.
It's exciting to be here, yes.
Now, just before we get into the story tonight and the question, were you labeled as a child, you almost didn't make it because about 2.5 weeks ago, you were part of that very bad the crashes on the QEW down towards St. Catharines, the Niagara area. Just briefly tell us, Dave, what happened?
Well, as you know, it was quite a snowy weather, lousy driving conditions, and the ice storm, many people were slipping and sliding. I don't think anyone was really at fault, but at the end of the day, my car, trying to avoid someone else's car, went into a spin because I was nudged in the back with a good clip in the back. And when I stopped spinning, I looked over my left shoulder and said, "Oh Lord, I'm glad I'm ready for heaven," because I thought he was coming in my seat. But at the last minute, he swerved and hit the front of my car, and I was just bounced around inside the car, and I suffered a concussion.
Now, someone hit you from the front, but someone else hit you from the back.
I was hit in the back originally, which put me into a spin.
Right.
Yes.
And the car?
And the car is basically no front end, no back end, and the good Lord was my airbag, because the airbag didn't work.
A write-off. Yeah. And so, Dave, you know what? We are grateful that in that pile-up, nobody, as I understand, lost their life.
As I understand, there was no one critically hurt.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Dave, we're asking the question, were you labeled as a child? And that is something you know quite a bit about. What was school like for you growing up?
Well, before I got to school, I grew up on a small hobby farm just outside of St. Catharines, and life was good. It was great on the farm. I have 4 brothers and my parents. Everything was pretty cool. And I don't think I really thought I had a learning disability. Maybe none of us really thought much about education, but when I got to grade 1 is when they really said I had a problem. Kindergarten, I did really well, except for the fact that how do I explain it? I was not real good with sharing and things like that. So that wasn't really a learning disability. That just kind of, I backed off of the crowd. So the disability, or label, as you may say, came when I failed grade 1. And
So was that the first time that you remember being labeled, quote unquote, dumb? And if so, how did that make you feel?
Well, you have to remember, labels quite often start out like a snowflake, but they can compound and they can snowball and build. So basically, yeah, I failed grade 1, and me and my best friend, we both failed. We were accused of cheating, but he was on one side of the room and I was on the other. But anyways, we were both kind of considered dumb, and yet it didn't really hit us till the following year. You know, you failed, and then the following year you come back and all your friends have moved on. But the dumb part, I guess, is just, it compounded because I had missed a lot of phonics, all the things that you do for your original, because I was sick a lot in grade 1. And I just never caught up. And the more I was behind, the more it seemed like they labeled me. And kind of, I was getting pushed through school. And the more I was getting pushed through school, it was like I was just the big kid who didn't know anything. because I really wasn't passing.
And so you struggled then with reading and with writing during those years?
I struggled with reading and writing probably right through till I was right through all my school. I didn't go on to university because I was afraid I couldn't do it. I managed to do well in high school. I went to a school that was more leaning towards trades, but I also enjoyed the sports out there. So yeah, reading and writing's always been an issue. In fact, I thank my wife, Cheryl, for helping me with reading, because she's the one person who said, just get in there and do it. Where before I could talk everybody on, just leave me alone, I don't need to do it.
So if you were in a group, for example, and everybody was having to read something, what was happening to Dave inside when he knew it's coming around to me?
Fear, great fear. My poor wife, when we first met, took me to a conference, and they did just that. I got a picture of me. I'm like 43 years old, or something like that. I'm in my 40s, and they said each person had a script to read. And when it got to my turn, and she had no idea that I was, because we had only just started dating, how I felt. And I basically looked at her and said, no way. In fact, I said, don't you ever, ever do that to me again. And we had a real eye-opener of who I was at that point. I was very afraid of letting people see me read out loud, especially, like see me in an audience reading. Even being in front of this camera is kind of a big deal too, because reading and writing has improved, reading has improved, mainly in private. But if I think I'm being graded, I still have issues of fear.
And so we go back then. You're talking when you were 43. When you were in grade 1, you were probably 6 years of age. Grade 2, 7. So you're going back 35 years from that time, when the beginning of that fear and the labeling started to take root in you. What do you remember as that little boy? You're a man now, strong, and you've won. We're going to talk about the awards that you've won in athletics, but that little boy of 6 or 7, what was going on inside of him?
That I was never going to measure up. That I was never going to be like everybody else. The learning to identify myself as something, how do I say it? I couldn't identify myself as ever being anything but a misfit. And I kind of eventually, my way out came out in anger. I don't think I naturally wanted to be a fighter, but I really didn't want to be teased anymore.
And so as you began to grow, the dumb kid phrase that you were labeled as became the big dumb kid. But you began at that time, as you say, to do something and to fight back.
Yeah, if I could just broaden on that, you know, when I started school. Now this might be different today, because when I started school and you started school in the 50s and the 60s, I started in the 60s, we still had the Lord's Prayer. And not that I was a Christian or really understood much about it, but it was about the only thing I had in the course of the day that made me think I had a friend to talk to. And so that part of the day, I mean, you still had God Save the Queen, you still had those things. And so to me, that was my only hope. And the labeling part, well, the teachers didn't know what to do with me in my first school. So about grade 5, they sent me to a school in the city. So I left a country school. I went to a school in the city, and there they put me in, I think the label of that class, because it had a label, was called the opportunity class. So I went from a classroom of 30 to 12 or 15. And of course, everybody knows who's in that 12 or 15. So there's no getting away from being labeled at recess, which led me to defend myself.
So how old were you, Dave? How old were you then when the Dave inside began to rise up and say, enough? You are not going to overpower me with words. I will overpower you with strength, physically strength, my physical strength. When did you begin to fight back in response to the labeling?
Very young age, very young age. I had older brothers that everybody looked up to. They were tough guys, they were good guys. I love them, and they had a reputation. And I thought, I can be as tough as them, as good as them. I mean, I remember kicking a teacher in grade 2. I mean, I was not afraid of ever losing. It was like, so what? I'm already a loser.
You know what? There you go. That right there, you were identifying yourself from what other people, that looking glass mirror that Brenna spoke of in the article we read on the problem with labeling children. You were hearing what others were saying, and that was reflecting back like a mirror who you thought you were, with devastating impact.
Oh yeah, I think at a very young age, we all want to belong. Everybody wants to belong, everybody wants to matter. But when you're being labeled, nobody really lets you in.
There's an article online from Empowering Parents. And again, you can find this at our website. It's empoweringparents.com, but you can also go to our own link at the Cross Live. And an interview with Josh Shipp, and he is a teen communication expert. He was abandoned and abused as a child, and was able to triumph over the tragedy and positively influence the lives of the countless adolescents he's coached. He's been on many different networks, and he says, here's what every kid needs to learn. If you don't identify yourself and decide who you are, other people will do it for you. Now, obviously, this is 1:20 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're watching in Edmonton, it's 20 after 11. If you're in Newfoundland and Labrador, it is getting to 3 o'clock in the morning. And so hopefully there aren't too many children watching, but as adults, what influence we have in positively reflecting back to a child or a teen who they are and their value and purpose, and to speak positively into their life. There's a scripture I want us to bring up, and then we're going to go to a picture of Dave as a boy, and an actual label that a teacher put on him. But let's go to Proverbs 18, verse 21, and listen to what these words say from the Bible in the Message translations. Words kill, words give life. They're either poison or fruit. You choose. Wow. You and I have the power, the choice every day to either speak words of life or words of death over people. The question is, what words will you or I speak? Let me just say that there are prayer lines available. People are here 24/7, and I was just in the prayer center before coming back into the studio for the program. And caring people are there. And I encourage you to give the prayer lines a call, 1-866 273-4444. Someone is there for you right now. And